On the night of July 22, 1991, a man ran out of an apartment building on North 25th Street in Milwaukee. He was partially clothed. A handcuff was dangling from his wrist. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely speak. Two police officers stopped him. He told them a man inside that building had threatened him with a knife, had tried to kill him. The officers walked him back inside, up to apartment 213, and knocked on the door. A calm, soft-spoken man answered. He explained that the man with the handcuff was his boyfriend, that they had an argument, that everything was fine. The officers believed him. One officer later said the apartment smelled strange, but they left anyway. 17 minutes later, the same officers came back, this time with backup. This time, they went inside. In the bedroom, Polaroid photographs of dismembered human bodies. In the refrigerator, a human head. In a 57-gallon drum in the corner, the remains of 3 human beings. The man who answered the door, the calm, soft-spoken man, looked at the officers and said, "For what I did, I should be dead." His name was Jeffrey Dahmer, and this was not the first time police had been to apartment 213. How did one man kill 17 people over 13 years in the same city, while police visited his apartment, received complaints about him, and arrested him multiple times? That is the question this video answers, and the answer will make you angry. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, the same day I'm recording this, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He grew up in Bath Township, Ohio, a quiet suburb, a normal house, a normal family on the surface. His father was a chemist. His mother struggled with mental illness. Their marriage was deeply unhappy. Jeffrey was, by most accounts, a lonely child, withdrawn, fascinated from a very early age with dead things. He collected roadkill. He dissolved animal carcasses in acid, curious about what would happen to the bones. His father thought it was just scientific curiosity. His neighbors thought he was a strange kid. Nobody thought it was a warning sign. By high school, Dahmer was drinking heavily. He brought beer to school. He performed pranks in class, loud, attention-seeking behavior from a boy who otherwise seemed invisible. His classmates remember him as odd but harmless. His teachers describe him as forgettable. In 1978, the summer after his high school graduation, 2 things happened simultaneously. His parents finalized their divorce, and in the chaos of that separation, Jeffrey was left alone in the family home for several weeks. He was 18 years old. He was completely unsupervised, and the thoughts that had been building in his mind for years finally had space to become actions. On June 18, 1978, Dahmer was driving near his family's home when he spotted a young man hitchhiking. His name was Stephen Hicks. He was 18 years old. He had just come from a rock concert. He was heading home to see his parents. Dahmer offered him a ride. He invited him back to the house. His parents were gone, he said. They could have some beers. Stephen said yes. He had no reason to say no. Jeffrey Dahmer was a normal-looking 18-year-old in a normal car on a normal road. They drank, they talked, and when Stephen said he needed to leave, Dahmer later told investigators what happened next with an almost clinical detachment. He said, "I didn't want him to leave, so I didn't let him." He struck Stephen Hicks over the head with a barbell. He strangled him. He dismembered his body and dissolved the remains in acid, the same process he had practiced on animals as a child. He scattered the bones in the woods behind his house. Then he went to college. He dropped out. He joined the army. He was discharged for alcohol abuse. He moved to Milwaukee to live with his grandmother. For 9 years, he did not kill again. 9 years, which means that for 9 years, whatever was inside Jeffrey Dahmer was contained until it wasn't. What broke the 9-year silence? And why, once it broke, did nobody stop him for another 4 years? In November 1987, 9 years after Stephen Hicks, Dahmer killed again. Stephen Toomey, 26, met at a gay bar in Milwaukee, taken to a hotel room. Dahmer later said he was drunk and claimed he could not remember killing him. He woke up and Toomey was dead. He smuggled the body out in a large suitcase. After that, the killings accelerated, slowly at first, then faster, then weekly. His method was always the same. He would meet men, mostly young, mostly black, mostly gay, at bars, malls, or on the street. He would offer them money to come back to his apartment for company or to pose for photographs. Once inside, he would drug their drinks with sleeping pills. When they were unconscious, he would strangle them. What he did after that, I am going to describe carefully, not because I want to shock you, but because understanding the full reality of what Dahmer did is the only way to understand what comes next, which is how the system responded, or failed to. Dahmer kept body parts. He photographed victims at various stages. He preserved skulls. He ate parts of several victims because, he later explained, he wanted them to be a permanent part of him. In his apartment at 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, the neighbors complained about the smell constantly, about sounds at night, about strange behavior. The smell was so powerful that neighbors put towels under their doors. Dahmer told building management it was his fish tank. They believed him. Before we go further, I need you to understand who these men were, not just their names, who they actually were. The 17 victims of Jeffrey Dahmer, in order: Stephen Hicks, age 18, 1978, was on his way home from a rock concert to visit his parents, had his whole life ahead of him. Dahmer's first victim, killed because he wanted to leave. Stephen Toomey, age 26, 1987, worked in a restaurant, met Dahmer at a bar, had no reason to be afraid of a quiet man who offered to buy him a drink. James Dockstader, age 14, 1988, 14 years old, offered money to pose for photographs. His mother reported him missing. Nobody followed up. Richard Guerrero, age 25, 1988. His family searched for him for months, distributed flyers, called police repeatedly. His case was treated as a low priority. Anthony Sears, age 24, 1989, aspiring model, had recently gotten a new job. His family described him as someone who lit up every room. Dahmer preserved his skull. Raymond Smith, age 33, 1990, known as Cash D to his friends. Father, his daughter grew up without him.
17 men and boys, the youngest, 14 years old. Every single one of them had someone who loved them. Every single one of them was failed. Not just by Jeffrey Dahmer, but by a system that did not treat their disappearances as a priority. And now I need to tell you about the moments that system had the chance to stop him and didn't. Jeffrey Dahmer was not invisible. He was not a ghost. He was a man who left a trail of red flags so obvious that looking back, investigators described it as almost surreal that he was never stopped. Here, one by one, are the moments that should have ended everything. The failures. Chronological. 1988. Arrested for child sexual assault. Dahmer drugged and molested a 13-year-old boy named Somsak Sinthasamphone. He was charged, convicted, and sentenced to 1 year of work release and 5 years probation. He was allowed to continue living in his apartment. During his probation period, he killed at least 12 people. 1989. His probation officer visited him twice. She described him as cooperative and making progress. She never entered the back rooms of his apartment. He was on probation for child sexual assault, and nobody was checking his apartment. May 1991, Konarak Sinthasamphone escaped. A 14-year-old boy, the younger brother of Dahmer's previous victim, was found naked, bleeding, and semi-conscious on the street. 3 women called 911. 2 officers arrived. Dahmer told them he was his 19-year-old boyfriend and they'd had a domestic dispute. The officers walked the child back inside Dahmer's apartment and left. One officer later joked about it on his radio. Konarak was killed that same night. Neighbors reported the smell repeatedly. The building manager received multiple complaints. Dahmer said it was a broken freezer. She offered to have it fixed. He declined. Nobody investigated further. Missing persons reports ignored. The families of multiple victims filed missing persons reports. Several went to police in person. Many were told their loved ones had probably just moved on. Several of these families were black and later testified that they felt their cases received significantly less attention as a result. 1991. Another neighbor heard a boy screaming. Glenda Cleveland, who lived next door, heard what she described as a child crying out in pain. She called 911. The dispatcher took her report. No officer was sent. The boy she heard was Konarak Synthesomphone.
The two officers who returned Konarak Synthesomphone to Dahmer were initially cleared of wrongdoing by an internal police review. Later, after public outrage, they were fired. One of them sued the city for wrongful termination. He won. The officer who walked a bleeding 14-year-old child back into a serial killer's apartment sued the city and won. Reverend Jesse Jackson traveled to Milwaukee in August 1991 after the arrest and met with the Black community. He said publicly what many had been saying privately, that the Milwaukee Police Department's repeated failures to investigate were not random, that the victims, poor, Black, and gay, had been treated as disposable. On the evening of July 22, 1991, Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man, met Dahmer near a mall. Dahmer offered him money to come back to his apartment for a photo session. Inside apartment 213, Dahmer handcuffed Edwards' wrist and held a butcher knife to his chest. He forced him into the bedroom. He told Edwards to lie still. He pressed his ear against Edwards' chest and listened to his heartbeat. For over an hour, Edwards kept talking, kept Dahmer calm, kept watching for an opening. And when Dahmer momentarily lowered the knife, Edwards punched him in the face, shoved him aside, and ran for the door. He made it to the street. He flagged down a police car, and he led officers back to apartment 213 for the last time. When police entered the bedroom, they saw the photographs first, then they opened the refrigerator. One of the arresting officers later said, "I have been a police officer for many years. Nothing prepared me for what was in that apartment." Dahmer did not resist. He did not run. He sat down on the couch and said, quietly, calmly, "For what I did, I should be dead." And then he told them everything, every name he could remember, every location. He cooperated fully, because by that point, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed almost relieved that it was over. Dahmer's trial began in January 1992. His defense attorneys argued he was legally insane, that his paraphilias and compulsions were a mental disease that he could not control. The prosecution argued he was a calculated, deliberate killer who knew exactly what he was doing and worked hard not to get caught. The jury agreed with the prosecution. On February 15, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was found sane and guilty on all 15 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. A 16th sentence was added later for the 1978 murder of Stephen Hicks. At sentencing, the families of the victims were given the chance to speak. Rita Isbell, the sister of Errol Lindsay, walked toward Dahmer screaming. She had to be restrained by officers. She later said, "I'm not crazy. I'm a mother whose son is gone." Dahmer was sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. He was kept in protective custody, away from other inmates, for fear of his safety. On November 28, 1994, just 2 years into his sentence, a fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver beat Dahmer to death with a metal bar in the prison gym. Scarver later said that Dahmer used to taunt other inmates, forming severed limbs out of his prison food and leaving them around the cafeteria. He said he had asked God whether he should do something about it. He said he received an answer. Psychologists and criminologists have spent decades trying to explain Jeffrey Dahmer, and they keep arriving at the same uncomfortable place. He was not, by clinical definition, a psychopath. Psychopaths feel nothing. Dahmer felt things intensely. He felt loneliness so acutely that he tried in increasingly desperate and horrifying ways to prevent the people he met from leaving him. In a 1993 interview, Dahmer said, "I always knew that it was wrong. The first killing was not planned, but after that, I made a decision. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway." That answer is, in some ways, more disturbing than if he had claimed insanity, because it removes any comfortable distance. He was not a creature of pure impulse. He made choices, calculated, deliberate, sustained choices over 13 years. And the people around him, neighbors, police officers, probation officers, building managers, made choices too. Smaller choices, easier choices, choices to believe a simple explanation instead of asking the next question. That is how 17 people died, not because of one monster in one apartment, but because of 100 small moments when someone decided it wasn't their problem. Jeffrey Dahmer was buried and then cremated after a legal dispute between his parents over what to do with his remains. His childhood home was demolished. Apartment 213 no longer exists. The entire building was torn down, but the families of his victims are still here, still living with what happened, still asking the same question the rest of us are asking. If the police had taken Konarak Synthesophone's escape seriously, in May 1991, 4 men would have lived. If Dahmer's probation had been treated as anything more than paperwork, dozens of reports and complaints might have been connected. If the missing persons reports filed by the families of black victims had been treated with the same urgency as other cases, we don't know how many people would still be alive. Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 people, but the question that his case forces us to answer is how many of those deaths required more than one person to make possible. Tell me what you think down in the comments. Was Dahmer the only one responsible, or did the system share that weight? I'll be reading every single one. Subscribe to Dark Docket because next week we're covering a man who was on the FBI's most wanted list for 40 years. He was a cop, he hid in plain sight, and he was caught because his own daughter sent her DNA to Ancestry.com. That story drops in 7 days.